Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh Jeffries video. In this video, I'm going to be trying to resurrect this iPhone 11 Pro Max that I purchased for 100 Australian dollars or around 75 USD, which is an amazing price for last year's iPhone model. However, this one has been completely destroyed by its previous owner. The back glass is completely obliterated and the entire frame is bent, resulting in the screen popping out of its frame. How did it end up like this? Well, apparently it got wedged into a bed frame and someone jumped on the bed, destroying the phone. While the screen appears to be intact, I was told the phone no longer lights up. Buying a bent phone is quite a gamble, as it could have major board issues or the phone could be completely dead. Before ordering any parts for this phone, I'm going to test whether the phone even charges. Plugging this iPhone 11 Pro Max into the charger, nothing appears on the display. So I'll use an amp meter to verify it's drawing about an amp of current, which should indicate it's charging. Don't plug the phone into a computer, as recent iOS updates block connections with USB devices after a restart, so it could be easily misdiagnosed as dead. As my phone appears to be working, I've gone ahead and ordered a new rear housing and frame, as well as a new display. Getting a closer look at the housing, you can see it's completely empty, so we'll need to transfer all of the phone's internals into this new housing. Getting started, I'll remove the two pentalobe screws from the bottom of the iPhone. Since there is a huge hole in the side of this phone, inserting a plastic pick to start lifting up that front display is a lot easier than it usually is. I didn't need any heat or even a suction cup. I will use this pick to cut through the adhesive holding in the display. It's also clipped into place on the sides and top, so I'll need to unlatch the clips to be able to lift up the display to the side. Getting our first look inside, I will start by removing the display and battery connections. To do this, I'll be removing 3 brackets and 5 cables. The brackets are secured with tri-wing screws, so you'll require a specific screwdriver to remove them. I will leave a link to a page on my website where you can get a list of all the tools I use, so you can get the right tool to perform a repair just like this. With both battery cables disconnected, I will unplug the display and remove it from our phone. I will immediately connect our replacement display so we can test the phone before we dive any deeper with our repair. Connecting up the 2 display cables and the 2 battery connections, we can power on the phone. Plugging it in, you can see it's flat. After letting it charge, it booted right up to a lock screen. I will need to reset this phone, but it seems to be working, so it's time to dive deeper with this repair. I'll disconnect our 2 battery connections and take off our new display. We'll be needing it later, but we need to fix the back of the phone first before we can seat our new screen in. I'll start by removing the rear cameras by unscrewing 1 bracket and several flex cables. Carefully lifting it out of place, we can put it aside for later. I'll also disconnect our Face ID module and remove it from the phone. This is a paired component, so we need to ensure that we don't damage it in the removal process so we can reuse it later. After disconnecting the flex cable going to the lower portion of the iPhone, I'll remove the 3 screws and SIM card tray holding in place our logic board. Pulling that out, we can get a closer look at it. As this logic board is composed of 2 boards soldered together, it's common to experience issues when a phone becomes bent, such as no touch, no network or activation issues. This one looks perfect and has no bend, so fingers crossed it's fully working. With the logic board removed, I'll proceed by removing the charging port, speaker and Taptic engine. There are a massive amount of screws to keep track of for this part, so I highly recommend using a magnetic mat to put screws and parts on to avoid losing them. Making things more tedious, Apple has also chosen to use 4 types of screw heads in this phone, so you'll need to keep changing bits throughout the repair. The charging port uses Phillips, tri-wing and a standoff screw type. I'm unsure on why they would use tri-wing screws, but I believe it may be to deter repair. Early iPhones were entirely held together with just Phillips screws. After removing the charging port, it's time to detach the battery. It's held in with 3 adhesive strips. In previous iPhone models, these were very easy to break off, leaving you with a lot of work to try and remove the battery. It appears these newer tabs are stronger and will likely break less than the old ones. However, I still think this battery is held down with too much adhesive. A trick to removing the battery tabs in one piece is to keep them as flat and straight as possible and pull them as close as possible to the battery. If removed successfully, the battery will literally fall out of the phone. It's now time to start working on the real tiny pieces inside this iPhone housing, starting with all of this antenna assembly up the top. It is screwed and adhered into place in several parts of the phone. Whilst I'm at it, I'll also unscrew the power button, rear-facing microphone, and flash. With the microphone being adhered into place, I'll need to apply some isopropyl alcohol and carefully lift it out of place. I can also use this alcohol to remove any of the sticky residue holding in place any of the flex cables and other antennas. I'll unscrew the power button and remove the flex cable. This will give me access to be able to remove the antenna assembly I was working on earlier. Using more alcohol, I can soften the adhesive on the antenna pads and remove them from the housing. While the phone is now looking quite empty, there is still more that needs to come out. At the top, I'll remove 2 gold contacts, the mesh for the rear microphone, and the SIM eject pin. At the bottom of the phone, I'll remove a display retaining bracket and proceed in removing the mesh and plastic spaces in the speaker and microphone ports. This is some really fine work that requires a lot of precision. It's a shame the new housing comes with absolutely nothing, as if it even just had a few of these smaller components, it would make the repair so much easier. Regardless, I'll need to move to the left-hand side of the phone where I can unscrew more display retaining brackets and the volume and mute switch. All that's left to do now is to remove the wireless charging coil, and this can prove quite challenging. I used some alcohol to try and soften the adhesive underneath. I found the best place to pry was at the bottom underneath the cable. As you can see, when removing it, it kind of looks like I've separated the two halves. However, what remains is just a piece of foil which has been adhered to the back of the glass. I couldn't get this out in one piece, but it's not necessary anyway. We now finally have everything removed. I needed 2 iFixit magnetic mats to fit all the parts on. While I haven't counted, there has to be close to 100 screws holding this phone together. In comparison, most Android phones come apart with about 10 to 15 screws. It's now time to crack open our replacement iPhone 11 Pro Max rear housing. This one comes with all the buttons, SIM tray, and the little clips that hold the buttons on. The buttons even come with the rubber gasket already installed. I could use the old buttons as well if I chose to, but I'm going to be using these nice new ones which have no scratches on them at all. After pressing them into place, I will fasten the retaining clip to the back of each button. One thing not included with my new housing was this little spring that attaches to the back of the retaining clip, so I'll need to transfer my old ones from the old housing to the new one. Simply attaching them with tweezers, our buttons are ready to go. I'll need to install the wireless charging coil. First, I'll clean off any remaining glass that came up when I removed the coil. I'll then apply some new adhesive and adhere it back into position, cleaning off any excess glue afterwards. With it glued back in, I can fasten the screws for the mute switch and volume controls. I'll then reinstall all of the metal clips on the side of the frame which hold in place the display panel. After reinstalling the SIM eject pin, I can reapply this plastic piece going over the screws. I can reposition this antenna flex cable and the power button assembly. After installing the mesh grill and microphone, I noticed that one of the standoffs was slightly bent. So using the end of my tweezers, I was able to bend it back into position so I could correctly install the bracket on top. Afterwards, there's a massive amount of tri-wing screws that I'll need to reinstall which secure the rest of the antenna and flex cables in place for the upper portion of this iPhone. It's now time to turn our attention to the lower portion of our iPhone housing, where I can install the mesh grills for the speaker and microphone arrays. These were quite difficult to line up, but using a pair of tweezers, I was able to get them installed. I could then refasten our charging port into position. Apple uses adhesive around the speaker and microphone holes. In my case, those adhesive gaskets disintegrated when I removed the charging port. As I don't have any to replace them with, water could possibly enter the device if it were submerged. Although this could happen anyway, as the device was never fully waterproof. After installing the Taptic engine and speaker back into our iPhone 11 Pro Max, it's time to turn our attention to the battery. The battery that came out of here has a slight bend to it. Nothing alarming, so I'll just simply bend it back into a straight position. I'll also apply some adhesive strips in a similar fashion to the original configuration. As I didn't have the specific battery tabs for this iPhone, I used some from an iPhone 10 and cut them to my needs. Applying them into position, I can press them down with a spudger and we're good to go. Proceeding, I can install the device's logic board back into position and fasten its 3 screws. After reconnecting a flex cable, I'll get the 3 rear-facing cameras installed and reconnect a few other cables. After installing the gold tabs that sit underneath the Face ID sensor, I can install the sensor itself and reconnect it to the device's logic board. Before I install any more screws, I'm going to test out our iPhone to ensure it's still working after our housing replacement. Connecting up the display and battery, we can see that it still lights up with the Apple logo and boots up successfully. So we'll continue on with our repair. Disconnecting that battery and display once again, we can continue reassembling our phone. I'll give the internals a good clean as we go to ensure there's no fingerprints or dust left inside. I'll remove the protective plastic film from the back of the battery and install it into position. I can then fasten the bracket holding in the charging port cable. Turning our attention to the top of the phone, I noticed that I installed a screw into the wrong position. So, swapping that around, I can install the bracket for the camera and Face ID cable. Proceeding, we can start working on the new display. For every iPhone model starting with the iPhone 8, you need to reprogram the display with the old display serial numbers in order to retain Apple's True Tone feature. Using a device like this JC programmer allows us to read the old screen's data and write it to our new display panel. Afterwards, on the old screen, I can unscrew the old earpiece flex cable. Applying some heat using a heat mat or heat gun can assist in removing the sensors that are glued in at the top. These are paired to each iPhone and breaking them will break Face ID. After carefully removing it from our old display, I can transfer it to our new one. Positioning everything into place, I can press it down and fold across our earpiece, screwing it back into position. Removing the protective film from the display, this completes our display assembly. The last thing we'll need to do is to connect the two halves together. I will apply a new water-resistant seal, which will go in between our frame and new display panel. After attaching that, I can connect the 3 display cables, the 2 battery connections, and the 3 brackets which hold everything down into place. After fastening the 12 tri-wing screws, I can now remove the protective film on the adhesive and seat the display panel to the frame. Carefully lining up the top portion of the screen first, I can then press everything firmly down into position. I'll now need to remove the protective film going around the edges of our new housing, which will reveal the bottom screw holes. Installing the 2 pentalobe screws, the phone is sealed up. I'll reinstall the SIM card tray and remove the protective film on both the back and front of the display. I'll also install a tempered glass screen protector, and we're almost done. The last thing I'll need to do is restore this phone to factory settings. It currently has the previous owner's data and passcode still on the device. After restoring the phone, I was able to successfully set it up with no troubles. I was able to successfully set up Face ID And True Tone is still working thanks to us reprogramming the display prior to installing it. With the phone set up, we're done. So this is it. A once destroyed iPhone 11 Pro Max is now fully functional and in perfect condition. But you're probably wondering, how much did this all cost? The phone plus the repair cost totaled 412 Australian or around 313 USD. Used on eBay here in Australia, these phones sell for around $950 to $1,100. So that's a minimum saving of $538. That's a massive profit for just a few hours work fixing up a broken one. This particular phone is a 64 gig unit running iOS 14.3. Unlike my other iPhone 11 Pro Max on iOS 13, I didn't receive a non-genuine display warning message. I'm unsure whether this is because the device is out of warranty, or restoring the phone immediately after replacing the display stops the message, or maybe even Apple has removed these messages in iOS 14.3. But I'm surprised nevertheless. And on that note, this has been a Hugh Jeffries video. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and consider checking out the restoration playlist for more videos just like this one. And if you're looking for any tips or what tools I use to repair devices, be sure to check out my website, link for which is down in the description. That's all for this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.